Imagine being 29 years old, pregnant, being financially sufficient, living in your own house with your husband, and still feel afraid to tell your mother about your good news. And why was I afraid to tell my mother about my pregnancy? Because I didn't want her to burst my happy bubble. You see, my mother has never been thoughtful with her words when it came to me. I remember calling her, and my hands were sweaty, my voice was cracking, and I had butterflies in my stomach, just like today. Anyway, as expected, after I delivered my news, all I had from her was, well, congratulations. Nothing else, nothing more. From there, she deviated the conversation to something else, and I was left with a feeling of sadness. Like this time, I really disappointed my mom for life. To be fair, that's how I will always live my life back there, afraid to disappoint my mother. My every move, she was in my head, shouting or looking at me in disapproval. And perhaps that's the reason why, from a young age, I was always the well behaved, the conformist, the house helper, the responsible one, and the obedient daughter. However, my friend and therapist Gavin Douglas says that that has to be with being the oldest child. If you Google it, it says oldest child syndrome equals the conscious desire to overachieve. For a long time, it was just me and my mother. I never met my biological father. From the age 5 until 8, I remember looking at my mother and feeling conflicted. On one hand, I used to hate that she was always working and leaving me with other people. On the weekends, she was too busy organizing the house, so our interactions felt so professional. There was no kisses, there was no hugs, there was no playing with my toys, there was no asking about my week, no telling me about her week either. I knew nothing about her outside world, and sometimes I wondered if she even knew what my favorite color was. On the other hand, I learned to admire her exactly from that tender age. She seemed that she was unstoppable, professional, revolutionary, activist, well spoken, always helping and caring for others. I was mesmerized by her. She was like Wonder Woman to me. Years later, I found out from experience that underneath all of that was a broken woman, which was scared and exhausted. A woman living in pilot mode, doing the necessary to look to the outside world as the strong, black, and independent woman. She didn't need a man, she was self sufficient. Now, imagine me as a child absorbing all of that behavioral information. When my son was 3 years old, me and his father separated. All of a sudden, I was left with a child, not much money in the bank, unemployed, and in the final weeks of my final university exams. So much hurt, pain, guilt, embarrassment, and humiliation of becoming a single mother. Everything that I didn't want to be because I didn't want to become my mother. However, I went back on that childhood memory and I took on all that propaganda that my mother indirectly sold me. And so the same cycle started all over again, working long hours and leaving my child behind for others to care. On the weekend, I was too tired to care about his wants and needs. And then, back on Monday, with a smile on my face, despite being a single mother to the outside world, I was doing just fine. But on the inside, I felt broken. And silently, I hated every single every single person that looked more happier and put together than me. On my graduation day, me and my mother had an argument. You see, I paid for her flight tickets to come to the UK and see me receiving my diploma. I went to university more for her than for myself, so I need her to be there and see me accomplishing not my dreams, but hers. I was the one there receiving that diploma, but that was her moment. However, due to some miscommunications at the door, she chose not to come in. She didn't see me. so much sacrifice to please her, and she couldn't even be bothered to see me. I felt so upset, hurt, and deceived. I realized that it did not matter what I do, I'll never be able to please her or make her happy. I realized that that day had everything to be the happiest day of my life, but it was one of the worst, but also the best. It was very sad, but also liberating. Yes, in that moment, I set myself free from that unhealthy cycle, from the pressures transferred to me to always perform, achieve, and live other people's dreams. Also, in that moment, something in my brain started to shift. I realized that my boy now was the one observing all of that propaganda of the strong Black woman who also believed that men were selfish and useless. Every word I had to say about his dad was negative, putting him down as a man. And there he was, my boy, looking at the adult world and learning from his mother, not loving lessons, but what hurt and pain sounds and looks like. I had to stop and think, what kind of an adult I want to come out of this child? How can I complain so much about men while raising a boy who will one day become a man? I had to adjust my behavior. I had gone to therapy. I had to make sure that he wasn't going to fall into the same pressures I felt growing up. I had to open the lines of communication and help him build emotional resilience. I had to strip myself from that strong Black woman title and dress new titles. I am a human being. I am allowed to cry. I am allowed to ask for help. I am allowed to be who I want to be. As I started to change, so did my son. As before, we had a strange relationship, just like me and my mother. Today, we have a strong bond, and sometimes our lines of communication are a little bit too open. Just the other day, he texted me at work to ask, "Mom, are men balls one bigger than the other?" Yes. I almost opened my legs to check, but then I realized my balls are up here. Anyway, just to show you that as a child, he felt comfortable and safe to ask me that question. It means that he trusts me. He trusts me about some transformations he's seeing in his body, and he asked his mom. I like to believe that today he's asking me those questions, tomorrow he will have no problem going to a doctor and asking about prostate examinations, for example. I also introduced my son to counseling when he felt he couldn't talk to me after I started a new relationship with my now partner. As his father left, he thought I was going to leave him too, so he felt he couldn't trust me. So it was important to me to show to him that when he feels that he can't talk to mom, there is help out there. It might be within the safe village that I created around us, or with the help of a professional like a therapist. He is free to tell me things like, "Mom, today I don't want to go to karate because I'm tired." And I'll allow him because he needs to know that he has a voice. He knows what I do for a living, and he cares enough to ask me about my day, what bothers me, and what makes me happy, and vice versa. Now, imagine if I had felt the same level of comfortability with my mother when I was a child, like my son has with me. Perhaps she would have been the first one to know about my child sexual abuse back then instead of 31 years later, or about the 2 times I attempted suicide, or even about the time I fell into an abusive relationship while trying to give my son a father figure. My story goes to show you that today we complain so much about men's mental health, depression, knife crimes, racism, crimes against LGBTI communities, and other important issues in our society. But who's raising the adults of tomorrow? We, the adults of today. So please reflect on this. Are your actions towards your children based on your traumas from the past? Are your words towards your children filled with pain and hurt? If yes, are you doing anything to change it? If not, I would advise you to change your narrative. You see, my mother did not change hers until 7 years ago, and twice she almost lost me at a tender age. Now imagine if your children feel the same way today. Are you willing to pay that kind of price? Mother Teresa once said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. I'll go a step back and say, if you want to change the world, go home. Work on yourself, heal your traumas, and then love yourself in all your entirety. Your children, and the children of your children, and the future generations coming from them will for sure benefit from that.